Welcome to Immersive Sports Science. Content not commentary, sports science not bro science. And today we'll be talking about the book, The Talent Hub. This book details the system to which Team GB used and the inspirations towards its elite Olympic talent system. The book gives unique access to Team GB, its intelligence sharing,
as well as detailing its talent identification processes and philosophies.
Sharing for the first time the incredible breakthroughs it made in order to make it from a nation of relative unimportance Olympic-wise to being an Olympic superpower. It gives the breakthroughs, the insights they discovered. These insights often extend way beyond sport, using lessons from organisations, the NFL Draft and the Royal College of Surgeons. It shows how talent can be discovered, nurtured, created, shaped and sustained. Thus highlights the systems utilised by Team GB for the 2012 Olympics and the 2016, delivering more medals in the Rio Games, something no other host nation has ever achieved after their own Olympics. It's not too far beyond the realms of imagination for this book to help businesses, business leaders or leaders in general, and people who may be interested within this book. Although it must be stated that the book is primarily for sports scientists or people trying to understand the sports science of sports development, specifically for the Team GB. What this book does, which many other books don't, is give us a massive insight into the sports science Team GB utilised. And for a book this slim, that the amount of information in here is absolutely astounding and astonishing, and it's one of the reasons why this particular video will be over 4 parts. Because let's face it, no one's going to sit around for an hour video. Not even I would sit through my own videos that are an hour long.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
The book was broken down into 5 sections: talent, transformational leadership, winning environments, performance, and sustaining success. Within the end of the chapters within those sections, there were like subsections of sort to notify the reader of key points of findings. Although Owen Slott is the leading author, really Chelsea Warr and Scott Timson were really the main authors, as it draws on their own experiences, especially working within the high performance system of Team GB. Many authors contributed towards the book. According to Owen Slott, 42 different authors managed to contribute to this particular book. Such contributing authors included the likes of Adam Peaty as well as some corporate authors. However, many of them sadly were not recognised. It would have been nice to have better recognition for their work. Yet again, what Owen Slott did was a lot better than some authors of journals, magazines and other authors within sports science who do not recognise the people who play the smallest and to a certain extent a greater part in writing their work. What Owen Slott did was a lot better than most editorial authors.
For countries to win an Olympic medal, well, that costs money. I understand for many people that sounds rather disconcerting, the thought and idea that Olympic medals, especially Olympic gold medals, in theory cost so much in the effort and the amount of time and money put in, rather than the individual efforts of the athletes. That's not taking away the individual of the effort of the athlete, it's just the fact that that's how much it costs to get people to that particular situation, or how countries are willing to spend that much to win those medals. The rise in Team GB was mirrored by the rise in funding for athletes. For Rio, £274 million was spent over 4 years on funding and preparing the Olympic teams, and £72 million was spent on the Paralympics team. In cycling, one of our most successful sports, we spent roughly £2.5 million per medal. All of this pales into insignificance when you realise countries like China spent $1 billion on their own Olympic and $2.4 billion not at the Athens Olympics but into the run-ups to the Athens Olympics.
The book starts in detailing how the system came into play, starting from the National Lottery funding and why we developed this system. In Atlanta, 2 British divers who did not medal had to flog their clothing in order to get back home. This caused an absolute uproar in the press, and the British management We've got coming out now. We got Great Britain top, selling it for £30. Who wants to buy this for £30? Well, it'd be dollars, wouldn't it? Because it's America. The Atlanta Olympics was Britain's worst ever Olympic performance at a Summer Olympics. Since 1952, Britain finished 36th in the official medals table, with just 1 gold out of an overall of 15 total medals. Team GB were dubbed the Team of Shame, within what would have been known for them, particularly as us as British, as the Game of Shame. There was even allegations or notions of some athletes having to prepare for the heat of Atlanta by doing warm weather training, or heat training should I say, within their own bathrooms. But because of these allegations, notions written within the newspapers, and the team doing so poorly, it raised an interesting question about funding for these athletes and the funding for the teams themselves. How do we actually support athletes and fund them? This led to the adoption of lottery funding for elite athletes, which started the following year. Now, in terms of actual funding, it's a very difficult thing within the British system because it's such a complicated thing. But basically, it's more or less government funded to a certain extent. I should really start taking this kit off because I haven't actually earned it. I don't deserve to wear it. It's unworthy to wear this.
Later that same evening.
When it comes to getting medals, generally there is a correlation between GDP per head of population, basically the economy size, and the population size. If you have higher population and higher GDP per head of that population, like the USA for instance, you're more likely to win medals, or more likely to get more medals, especially golds. Of course, there are both cultural differences and general genetics of the population, availabilities of the sport, and the culture of that sport being played in that country. For instance, rugby is not particularly well played in America. Yes, they have recently tried to push that on, but they're generally still not as good at it as they probably could do, or what you would expect from population size and economy alone. Again, teams like Fiji, who have relatively small population, relatively small GDP, have won a gold medal in it. And of course there are other determining factors, specifically and individually to certain nations. Britain did not seem to perform, or at least meet, its potential based upon its GDP and its population size. If you like, Britain was the outlier, while countries like Australia seemed to punch above their weight. Why was this the case? However, there were some unique problems specific to the UK that were noticed. The vast majority of sports at the Olympics are particularly, or have a history of amateur sports. Yet again, our provision towards those athletes was quite frankly non-existent, or even amateur. There was no funding towards it, meaning that we could not potentially compete against other nations. There was also a massive dropout in athletes, particularly of certain ages, that would have gone on and won medals. And the supporting of athletes that, if you like, will put medals around them at a young age, and they were never going to make it. However, regardless of this, the British government saw fit to start funding their athletes and start funding the national governing bodies that run the Olympic sports they were in. There is a number of criteria in order to receive funding, and the amount of funding one receives as a national governing body from Sports UK. UK sport investment for national governing bodies is a privilege, not an entitlement. Funding will be awarded on a competitive basis to NGBs which put forward strong plans and have a good track record of delivering on those plans. Whole sport plan investment must deliver one or more UK sport talent and participation expected outcomes. UK sport expects 60% to benefit young people aged between 14 to 25, and 40% to benefit the rest of the adult population. Schools must deliver a robust transition program which creates the links between schools, clubs and community sports. In other words, developing the community whilst at the same time developing the elite athlete. And if they don't develop as an elite athlete, at least keep them healthy and active, because we in the UK have an obesity epidemic, an obesity problem at the moment, like most, or at least the rest of the world. So by developing those youngsters and kids and developing those sports, or it's hoped that we are more likely to keep them in that sport and therefore keep them active, or at least keep them in an active, healthy lifestyle. National governing bodies will need to demonstrate how they are to connect, work together, and have impact on their participant, or at least impact on participation. Value for money is a key consideration. Well, that one was short and sweet. A reward and incentive fund will be allocated during an Olympic cycle to national governing bodies who perform exceptionally well. To be eligible for funding, national governing bodies must meet the high standards of governance and financial control. If you like, those are the 9 points to which a governing body who's looking to fund their athletes must meet in order to maintain and at least get more funding in the future. And as mentioned before, in the UK sport, we utilise an Australian type template for talent identification and talent selection. However, it's up to the governing bodies of those sports, or national governing bodies, to make the final decision. In other words, we got to trust them on their decisions and their funding. They are the ones who know their sport better, and we can't just necessarily prompt something onto them that may not be the best fit or model for their system or the culture they're looking to promote and develop. A high performance culture, individual to that sport and that team's needs. Another reason for this is because we have a complex system of funding. Like the author Chelsea Warr, who helped write the book and has much history on talent ID systems, especially when she worked in the Australian system, helping to influence Team GB's talent identification and talent selection and the nurturing of elite performance. It may shock some people, however, the system philosophies we utilise, although based upon the Australian system, the Australians themselves actually in part base their system, or let's say the philosophies of the system, on the East German talent identification system. The East German system is denounced by all. However, it is the basis for most Western systems of talent identification. Yes, there are separate different ones like the Russian system, which we are still learning to this day. One thing to note from my own personal experience, seeing Russian athletes training in alpha, or let's say they're juniors at least, the ones who aren't necessarily the best, or whether we've been training in South Africa, having a slight understanding of their system, the muscle biopsy data and the selection of these athletes based upon genetic details from a very young age, seeing the secretive nature of them pulling down their laptops, for instance, when you clearly know they're hurdling, but to them this is something that is of national importance, and therefore they have to deal with this national importance because it gives them a competitive advantage. You find with the Western system, because we have less restriction upon what they do, they can write books like this, they can jump systems and bring their ideas and philosophies on. Therefore a Western system, not necessarily open, but it's far more open than, let's say, something the Russians are doing, probably because they're doping as well.
Post-Atlanta, it highlighted that Britain has a desire to live it up, so to speak, and not necessarily live the athletic lifestyle because it's not considered socially desirable from a very young age. Up until very recently, where they kind of get seen as like heroes now. And the sacrifice they make is now kind of romanticised. I mean, come on, we even celebrated at our own Olympics. Not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, because sometimes you just need to let your hair down.
So Liam was part of the Ibiza crew, which, by the way, I know I said I was going to do a vlog. We filmed the whole week, we just sent it to the review team, and we basically weren't allowed to upload any of the footage. True. I mean, and I can't explain why, but you can use your imagination. It just won't align with my brand of being a role model athlete. You know, that 5 days in Ibiza stays off camera. Doesn't make it to the internet, otherwise it'll ruin my career.
And performance lifestyle and knowledge, and having the knowledge to perform at an elite level, and knowing what it takes from a training perspective and a lifestyle perspective, and being able to structure those programs to meet their elite athletes' needs, rather than having being more sporadic across the country. In other words, their training programs needed to be more centralized.
I'm here for my 11:30 appointment. I'm here for my 11:30 and 11:30.
I don't want you to be no slave. I don't want you to work all day.
What? Now, the British high performance system is sometimes referred to as the Shakespeare system, named after a skeleton director called Will Shakespeare, no relation to the playwright. Well, I don't think he's any relation, but you never know. He had to develop skeleton athletes that will perform better. When told by Chelsea Warr and the team about the potential changes towards the UK funding, and in particular funding to his sport and what they required of him, He prophetically, like his namesake, stated at the time, "I'm in deep shit." The differences between an East German and a Romanian system is it's either an effective or an efficient system. So, an effective system, you try to get as many athletes as possible, knowing that only a few of them will then become elite athletes. So a good example is within a scouting system is football. But likewise, they lose over 90% of those footballers they have within their system. They only get it right only a percentage of the time. An efficient system takes a few very elite athletes, and the dropout as a result is very low. If you like, the East German is the effective system, while the Romanian system is an efficient system. What the Australians did was take the stuff that was morally acceptable and combined it with the need for generating power or endurance, depending on what is most expedient for that sport, and second of all, the skill of the athletes. But likewise, how do you know you've got the right people on board? And when I mean by the right people, I'm not just talking about the athletes themselves. I'm talking about the people in charge of the management. For instance, in athletics in the UK in particular, it's been noted that there's been a possible Rosenthal effect, or should I say Parmenion effect. Now, Parmenion is from Greek mythology, and basically he built a statue and then fell in love with it. So to put that into a sports context, many coaches or many systems will focus on their athletes that they've developed themselves while neglecting other athletes who may potentially be better in the future or be a better fit or more likely to become elite. As a result, those elite athletes drop off, and the athletes we push forward to believing they are elite may not necessarily be good enough. As Michael Johnson put it, we were investing in the Wonder Kids, putting medals around their necks before they were even ready. As Ghetto states from his own research within South African rugby players, when we have two athletes roughly the same level and we make the decision to invest in one and not invest in the other, we are in a way affecting the likelihood chances of them actually becoming elite, or at least making it. The athlete here needs another avenue, otherwise they will be lost to the system. Many of these so-called wonder kids, who are the star in the eyes of their coaches and the selectors, many of whom were the oldest in their age group. If you like, they had developed quicker than their peers. Thusly, they had less to develop when they reached adulthood. Therefore, we were possibly choosing the guys who already were developed and therefore had less room to develop into better athletes when they were younger, rather than the athletes who were hot on their tails. One of the reasons why we see a huge dropout in athletics in particular is the athletes who have been excellent all their lives suddenly get beaten by the guys who are just behind them, who they were beating all the time, and therefore they're not strong-willed enough to stay in the sport, hit it out and potentially improve themselves as athletes. According to the motto of NFL Undiscovered, potential is just unrealized talent. Just because you are good as a kid does not necessarily mean you will make it when you become an adult. The transfer from good junior to good senior athlete is often very low. Since 2000, the proportion of junior medalists becoming senior medalists, either in the World Champs or Olympics, is only 16.2%. Only 24% of athletes who finish within the top 8 of their junior world events will either medal at either a World Championships or at an Olympics. Across the world, 24% of athletes who gained medals at either World Championships or at Olympics did not finish within the top 8 World Championships at a junior level. In Britain, 63% of our athletes who medalled as juniors would then potentially go on to become elite athletes. Now, we're either breaking the trend and being the anomaly, which is kind of cool. Maybe we were just so heavily focusing on those athletes rather than the athletes who are nipping at their tails. But then think about it, it is natural to want to support athletes who are good now because we can physically see them doing well. It's much harder to try and figure out who has potential or who's more likely to be a world champion or an Olympic champion at a later date, because we can't necessarily see their physical development's likelihood to be at a younger age. Think of it like playing FIFA and you've got those little cards and it comes up with their potential either being between 40 and 80. They could either fit somewhere between that, and it's hard to see at the time. when you are selecting them. It's a natural reaction to want to help those who are doing well, especially doing well at the moment. And what is scary in particular at the time was 61% of GB athletes who were being funded weren't really in the desired age range for their events. Now, this might be because we are an anomaly again, and well, you know, our older athletes are doing really well. Unlikely. It could be the fact that we just weren't developing the youngsters, or we just weren't funding the youngsters, or the youngsters just weren't coming through. So therefore, we focused on those who were doing well at the time. But those guys are doing well at the time are not going to be there forever. And when you're at the peak of your career, you've only got a few years before you really retire. And at sporting age, you only have a few years at sport to do sport. Sporting careers don't often last long. Therefore, it's vital to find out who to actually support. Also, what you would expect is there to be a 50-50 in terms of athletes who are male and female doing well. What you find is that some nations will have the men slightly do better than the women, or maybe the women do slightly better than the men, but it's more likely that way round for whatever reason. Out of the major nations, it's usually that way round for whatever reason we don't know. But for us in particular, the women were outperforming the men vastly. Go on, girls, go for it. Girl power! But why is that? Why was this the case? Now, when it comes to individual sports, there is a minority of, or at least anecdotal evidence, suggesting that coaches are more likely to train women athletes because they believe they will then perform and make them their name, because they're more likely to become an elite athlete than a male athlete. It could be that the number of female athletes is lower, so all they have to do, providing they're the elite athlete and they have the support they need and the coaching they need, no point holding on to an athlete if they're not going to perform. Those female athletes are more likely to become elite if they just hang around for longer. But that's probably slightly sexist, that argument, and utterly debatable whether that is the case or not.
Britain currently have a lack of female coaches and a lack of female board members, as noted with my discussion with Leanne Norman as part of the DCEP Northern Applied Hubs podcast. We should be doing more as a nation to promote female coaches and promote female board members. As they make up 50% of the population, they therefore have something significant to add to promote this to female coaches to want to do the high performance. We need to make it enticing to them, but we also need to give them the opportunities to be able to do this. We need to break the perception of the old boys club.
But don't get me wrong, there are problems in female sport, which we will mention in the next video about transformational change. What was needed was a change in leadership, or at least a change in the culture of leadership. It is believed by Chelsea Warr that businesses require talent to get them to peak. I would debate, why would a business develop people? That takes time and money, and quite frankly, they'd rather have someone who's already ready-made and thrown into the experience to be put into that position. Instead, you develop yourself through experience of life, work, and through your grades. That then indicates whether you have the experience, and you rise yourself up the ladder as a result. But then, yet again, I've never had the opportunity to work for a Fortune 500 company, which is what she's pretty much stating here. But the business understanding of talent does help us to understand why in Britain underfunded talent, and not the funding talent that we had pumped so much money, why weren't they meddling? The way we can understand this is through economics, or at least through the maths of economics, and trying to discover, utilising economics, what is best practice, and developing the culture within each sport's national governing body. If you like, this is a new sports science that doesn't necessarily fit well between the traditional understandings of sports science, being biomechanics, sports psychology, and physiology and anatomy. So importantly to know, we have the system, but how do we identify the talent to enter that system, and the talent to be funded correctly? Took inspiration from British surgeons, the SAS, the Yehudi Menuhin Music School, and I totally know I've murdered that pronunciation, as well as some big business. This taught her how to manage the flow of talent, how to seek those who are not being forced into it, who are willing to engage in the system and the environments they are surrounded with. Those who are likely to survive and those who are likely to thrive. With a competitive environment that is challenging and will seek for them to improve themselves in order to meet the needs of the environment. In order to do well in these environments set out by these high-performance systems, you needed the psychology to be able to do well in them. And this would help show up that those with the psychology to likely become elite athletes, or at least become medal hopefuls. From a management perspective, it had the ability to give those who are involved in the talent identification system to identify talent to look at the larger picture, if you like, in a German word called Stingelschwitzen, and I know I've totally got that pronunciation wrong, and if you're German, please write down in the comments below how I've got it so and utterly wrong. But basically, it's a German word, or an ancient German word, meaning the fingery toes. Basically, your grasp of the entire system, your grasp of the bigger picture, the landscape, the environment you're surrounded in. If you're trying to engage and micromanage everything to the smallest detail, you miss the larger picture, and you potentially miss the athletes you're looking to recruit. More importantly, everything I've mentioned above should be able to be measured and understood by everyone involved in the system, or at least the selection of the system. This is what differs between a talent identification system and a scouting system. A talent ID system should have clear understandings of why you selected those athletes and selection criteria. It's about knowing who to select in the most scientific based detail and who not to select. And this is something Chelsea Warr learned from her time as a female talent identification coach. She thought she would focus on the most objective things she could think of. That would be weightlifting. She chose 70 female athletes, on which 13 of them then went through into an elite system. And within 3 months, they had all dropped out. Therefore, the understanding towards the athlete should be placed at a high priority. You should be able to understand the culture and the psychology of the athlete to want to do that sport. They have to be willing and wanting to do it. And athletes should be encouraged to switch sports, because they may be doing okay at one sport, but they may, let's face it, they might not be good at it. But yet again, they may have the genetics, or at least the ability to do better at another sport. Cue Jazz Carlin and Nicky Romero. There should be diversity in talent recruitment. This enhances talent recruitment, or at least helps us to improve unearthing future potential talent. And likewise, sometimes you just need to take calculated risks and experiment on what could potentially give you best athletes, or at least athletes who are more likely to medal. Likewise, this can be seen as a bit of a risk, especially as your national governing body could lose funding, or you could lose your job. In terms of taking risks, it's interesting to look at the sport of Taekwondo, otherwise known to us mere mortals as head kicking. Oh, almost fell over though.
There are 2 codes to Taekwondo: the ITF, or the International Taekwondo Federation, and the Olympic recognised sport of the WTF, and I'm not talking about tech slang here, the World Taekwondo Federation. By convincing both federations to combine pools and allow their athletes to compete across codes would increase your pool of potential Taekwondo athletes. However, this created a controversy at the 80 kilogram category. Aaron Cook, former world bronze medalist and the ranked number 1, was dropped from the squad in favour for Latalo Mohammed. By the 2012 Olympics was ranked 53. Now, Latalo Mohammed's dad was the UK's head of the ITF. Make of that what you will. However, the risk managed to pay off, as Latalo Mohammed managed to medal in both the London 2012 Games and Rio 2016. What they also found out that was kickboxers, both European and Muay Thai, were better Taekwondo fighters because they were more aggressive and therefore more assertive to find points. This chapter highlighted the problems with this book, and I'm focusing on it, the risks they took and the risks they did well, and saying this is the perfect system, when clearly, and in most cases, this was not the perfect system.
In terms of finding athletes, And in terms of developing their environment, what can we not live with and what can we not live without within our system? And you need to trust the scouts and the people who are finding the talent. We as sports scientists are not generally good at finding talent because we're not necessarily within the sport. We can utilize the science to find it, but that's on alone is not good enough. The scouts will know, looking at them and the skills they need to develop in them, what will make a potential athlete. Yes, they do get it wrong, and they're very good at getting it wrong, but they're a lot better at getting it right than what we as sports scientists are. This harks back to Chelsea Warr's weightlifting example. And likewise, in any system, there has to be a collective agreement. What will the system actually have from both the athletes? They need input to a certain degree, and you can manipulate their input, make it feel like they came from them, and the coaches, and basically everyone in that system. If they have greater ownership of the system, they're more likely to want to be willing to engage in that system. Ownership creates independence, but naturally they still need the resource.
But how do you tell the difference between elite and super elite athletes? And the difference between them, they define it, elite being international athletes, while the super elite are multiple time medal winners. What are the differences between them? We used to have this concept of what makes a medal winner. And then when we tested our own athletes, we found out the vast majority of the multiple medal winners we had did not fit this bill, or did not fit what most of the world's athletes who were medal winners were like. In terms of the Lou Hardy study, it looked at reformed consciences and that super elite athletes had relative importance of sport and normal life. They were highly intrinsically or goal motivated, but also highly outcome motivated or extrinsically motivated. They were also perfectionists, and this kind of goes against what the literature normally states. And as previously, we thought these were bad things and negative towards long-term performance. When it comes to teams, we always have a concept about reducing the mavericks as they're more likely to question or challenge the system. When it comes to teams, we always have a concept about reducing the mavericks as they're more likely to question or challenge the system.
And likewise, this relates to the Alex Ferguson's bad apple theory. Will you allow a maverick in there, but could potentially destroy the culture of your team? But he's potentially really good. Or maybe it's just me. Maybe it's me just thinking he's a bad apple. Or do I rip that bad apple out like you rip a cancer from a body? He's like a cancer or she's like a cancer. I don't want him in my team because it will ruin the culture. That depends on the individuals involved and the team itself. For the most part, ultimately it's subjective.
However, mavericks are generally more driven or have a better desire to perform. As seen with our men's cycling team, if you have a team of mavericks, it can be a successful performance environment that allows you to do things differently, not exceptionalism like we mentioned earlier, but do things better than the surrounding teams around you. Being a maverick can be highly beneficial in an individual sport, more so than a team sport.
There's a difference between talent and performance. Talent being those who are likely to perform compared to those who will actually perform. And it's knowing at what point when this talent is actually being recreated. If it's not being recreated, you get rid of it. Or you least, it sounds a bit harsh, but this is high performance talent. At least give them the ability to then later on, if they can, give them a chance to then perform. Performance in a high performance environment is the key word. You have to perform to be in that environment. You have to perform to deserve to have that funding. And in my opinion, historically, to a certain extent, we've over-focused on the talent that's shouting, yes, I am great, or the talent that's doing well now, rather than focusing on talent that will likely to perform.
All in all, the environment has to be right for the athlete, and that's going to be individual to both the sport and the individual athletes themselves. And without all these facts, transformational change process designed to create significant change in a culture or work processes of an organization and to produce significant improvements in performance is just simply not possible. But naturally, it's okay to admit sometimes we don't get this right. In the next episode, we look at examples from business in how to turn failure into a success. We also look at how to coach female and male athletes, as well as preventing exceptionalism and getting our ideas from foreign sources.